Hey everyone, welcome to the Our Wisconsin Revolution podcast. So experts predict we have less than 12 years to seriously address climate change before we see irreversible damage. While this knowledge is well known, we've seen little to no action from elected officials to address climate change. This is no surprise as the oil industry has huge influence over our political system. They bankroll Republican and Democratic candidates across the country. So it's easy to understand why no serious action is taken when it comes to addressing climate change. But despite the odds, groups across the country continue to fight for climate justice and push their elected officials to do the same. And one of those groups is the Sunrise Movement, a youth-led climate action group fighting to implement the Green New Deal and other climate-related policy. Since they formed, they've had a major impact on our electoral system. Because of groups like the Sunrise Movement, there is truly hope for the future. So I'm glad to have on Anders Hanhan from the Sunrise Movement. Today we're going to be discussing the Green New Deal, the impacts of climate change, and what the Sunrise Movement sees for the future of climate justice. So thank you guys for tuning in, and let's get into it.
So we always say the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Our Wisconsin Revolution podcast. My name is Andre Walden, and we have a very special guest today. We have Anders Hanhan, and then we're also joined with our co-host, William Walter. I'm really looking forward to this podcast. So, Anders, I'm really excited to have you on. So, you're part of the Sunrise Movement. Can you tell us a little about the Sunrise Movement and yourself?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you guys both for having me on. What you guys are doing is super cool, and I think that podcasting is a great way to get out the message that, our Wisconsin Revolution and progressive groups like this are sharing. So I work with the Sunrise Movement, and those of you who haven't heard of the Sunrise Movement, it's a youth-led nationwide organization and movement working towards the goal of climate justice. And there is a national organization. A lot of people may have heard about them in the news, but the actual work of achieving bold climate policy has happened a lot at the local level before it's happened at the national level. And we have local Sunrise Movement hubs all over the country. There are over 400 of them. I personally am the hub coordinator of the Sunrise Movement hub in the Fox Valley area of Wisconsin, which is roughly Green Bay, Appleton, and Oshkosh, and the surrounding towns in that area. But we work, through coalitions with the national organization on national issues, but also a lot of local advocacy and working with other local groups. But more personally, I'm a freshman in college at Lawrence University here in Appleton, and I'm originally from the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I just really have a passion for progressive politics and progressive organizing, and it's the Sunrise Movement has been a great place to do that and work with other young people who think like I do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm pretty sure Will can attest to this as well, but I wish I was this politically involved when I was a freshman in college. I mean, the only thing I was really worried about was probably partying. So I didn't do too much politics. I mean, I voted. I think that was the year Obama was going for a second
That's
term.
That's the thing, Andre, is our freshman year was Obama's second term starting, which was, kind of the last couple of years of normalcy, I guess you could say, before the Trump years kind of blew everything out of proportion.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the Trump election kind of woke a lot of people up, including myself. But for me, I would like to know a little bit more about how, before we get into kind of the policies you guys fight for, how did you get involved with Sunrise Movement, and what got you politically active?
Yeah, so I honestly everybody asks this question, like when you're involved in organizing, is like, what got you involved? Why are you here? And I find that a lot of people kind of point towards that sentiment that you guys are suggesting about, is like 2016, seeing Donald Trump getting elected, and obviously, a very radical, toxic presence in our politics for sure. But I'll be honest with y'all. Like, for me, what got me like engaged in issues was the 2016 primary election. Like, I was very much interested to see, as just somebody who grew up in a political household, like who would follow Obama. And it became very apparent to me, even though, at that point I wasn't super involved in like issues and like knowing what policy I wanted to solve each problem. It became very clear to me just watching Bernie and Hillary debate that Bernie was clearly a much better leader and had a much better idea what he was getting into than Hillary did. So the kind of to see how that whole primary played out and how Bernie was treated so unfairly was really what got me to the point where it's like, I know exactly what policies I want to advocate for, and not becoming compliant. Because I think with a lot of people, like talking about that second Obama election, I think a lot of left-leaning and progressive voters were kind of just along for the ride in the Obama years. And I think one thing kind of transitioning into Sunrise that's really exciting for me is it seems like more and more young people aren't just going to take, what, for example, we're not just going to take what Joe Biden gives us. We know what we want, and having, a blue D next to your name on the TV doesn't mean that if you do something wrong that makes it okay. And I think that's something that really excites me about young people, is even though Joe Biden is a Democrat, if he speaks in support of Israel, young people are willing to stand up to that and call that out, which is really exciting. And I think the Sunrise Movement is an organization of strong young people that think that way. So, I mean, I had been following the Sunrise Movement on social media for a while. And they held when AOC was first elected, they held a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office. That it got a ton of media attention. AOC and the Sunrise Movement sat in Speaker Pelosi's office in 2019, demanding that she allow a vote on the Green New Deal. A ton of the young protesters were arrested, and that kind of like kicked off the Sunrise Movement's notoriety. So after that, I had followed them on social media, but hadn't gotten super like actively involved in politics or organizing. But then when I got to school, I happened to meet a few people through classes who had a lot of the same political opinions, and like disdain for the establishment of both parties that I do. And they had just started to get involved in the Sunrise Movement in what at the time was a brand new hub here in the Appleton area. And I kind of jumped at that opportunity to kind of get in on progressive organizing at like the ground floor in this area. And, after doing it now for only about 5 months actively, like I could not be more excited about like the potential for what could be coming here in the coming years.
Yeah, I'll edit my answer as well to agree with you that the 2016 primaries, like yes, the Trump 4 years was an awakening for a lot of people, and it was so blood boiling that it kind of took my activism into overdrive. But the 2016 primary, I think, was the real singular event that kind of sparked a lot of this, because not just with Bernie and Hillary and so many people seeing how the party that was, to a lot of young people, the quote-unquote good guys, were actively, frankly, cheating and trying to push their brand candidate against what popular society tended to think. But the Republican primaries were fascinating to follow as well. I mean,
it was a carnival. It was a carnival.
Yeah, it was reality television show 101. You couldn't write that kind of stuff. And so to watch both parties in such massive disarray was kind of a curtain unveiling moment, I think, for a lot of people who were politically active, but might not have been as well versed in some of the nuance behind the scenes, that it really did kind of show you that it's not as black and white as I think both parties want their constituents to think. They want you to think that it's like a Star Wars movie where your team is the Jedi, you guys are automatically the good guys, and the other team is the Sith, and they're automatically the bad guys. Well, the world doesn't really work like that, and honestly, Star Wars doesn't work like that. If you really dig into the details of it, nobody is inherently perfect, and while the opposition is inherently evil, that's a trick that despots use to kind of keep their people in line. So that is an excellent point on what I think really woke up a large chunk of young people that we're seeing now be so passionately active.
And just to be clear, Will, like the and I think you would agree with this, not to sound like I'm trying to aggressively find a silver lining or anything, but in a deeper way, like Bernie won that primary. Like the policy that he advocated for became vastly more popular than anything Hillary advocated for. And in fact, massive chunks of his platform were like the status quo in the 2020 primary. I mean, you had half the people running for the Democratic nomination endorsing Medicare for all. Whether or not that was genuine is a whole nother discussion. But here's the thing is, like, after that primary, politicians are realizing, like, Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and living wages and a jobs guarantee are vastly popular. And now it's just about getting them to stick to their promises.
Yeah, if we do somehow manage to save society and not completely collapse in the next 20, 30, 40 years from, our capitalist hegemony or climate change or whatever it may or may not be, the 2016 Sanders run is going to be the thing that I think a lot of historians look back at as this is what shifted the cultural narrative. I think former Bernie staffers would tell you as well, as a number that I've spoken with have said this, that Bernie himself did not expect to win in 2016. He ran only to bring these issues to the forefront, hoping that if the issues, polled well enough or did well enough with the general population, that in 2020, 2024, 2028, they may have a chance to start becoming the norm. I think he would, if someone were to sit him down and get an honest response from him, I think he would be incredibly proud of not only how well his campaign did, perhaps if they had been preparing a little bit more ahead of time, they actually could have won that, because Hillary and the establishment had no defenses prepared like they did in 2020. But to see how many of his ideas were mainstream so quickly after that is monumental, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would like to point out that I'm noticing from what you guys are saying is that the way our generation views politics is changing rapidly. Because I guess back in the 90s, the Bill Clinton, Reagan eras, all people cared about was the symbolism of, of politics. Like, if you wore a nice suit, you spoke like a politician, and you said some of the right things, you can get by, despite if you had terrible politics. And now we're seeing a shift in our political system where you have an old Jewish guy from New York who speaks like a regular person, who doesn't comb his hair, who says, I want Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, and I want, climate change, climate justice. And that kind of blew the socks off the establishment, because they were not prepared for that, because they thought politics was the same as usual. And I think the nice thing about our generation is we're very, very much policy focused. Like, we need you to sign off on A, B, and C, and D, or you're not getting our vote. And if you don't do what we say, then we're going to find somebody else. And that's very different than the older generation. The older generation was just like, hey, if you come drink a beer with me, if you seem relatable, and you're really good at speaking, that's kind of good enough for me. And our generation is not going along with that. So I think that's going to really change the dynamics of politics in the future. It's not going to be played out. And you can even say that on the Republican side. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, somebody like Trump would have had zero chance of getting elected. So we're really seeing a and anti-establishment era brewing, that we don't want the same as usual. We want somebody that's actually policy focused. But I'm not saying Trump was policy focused, but he did kind of focus more on policy on the campaign more than Hillary, which is kind of saying something about establishment politicians. But as a generation, millennials and Zoomers, we're definitely changing the dynamics. So that's why I'm really excited about that. But I did want to get into some policy focus a little bit, because we like policy. One of the big things that kind of came about after the election of AOC and kind of the rise of Sunrise Movement, no pun intended, was the Green New Deal. Now, the Green New Deal is it's obviously a policy that kind of restructures the American economy around obviously having green technology involved in restructuring our economy and in boosting our economy, sort of like a new deal for our generation. Anders, what is the Green New Deal for people who don't really understand it? And what is your, I guess, the Sunrise Movement's tactics on getting politicians to recognize it and support it?
Yeah, okay. So I love talking about this because the Green New Deal, the reason that I think it's the best solution to the climate crisis is in no way is it just an environmental scientific solution. Because let's be clear, over 5% of the American workforce works in fossil fuel and the energy industries. So you can't just get rid of those industries without a framework for what comes after that. Because we're taking away, miner jobs and people that work in oil fields and on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a lot of people that are employed that way. And what the Green New Deal does is we're saying, okay, we have to be carbon neutral by 2035. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to tax the carbon emissions that are still happening, which will obviously decrease investment in fossil fuel industries. And on the flip side of that, those taxes and in addition to taxing the wealthy more fairly, will fund a federal jobs guarantee program where any American who wants a job can have one that pays a living wage, building green energy infrastructure that's sustainable. America, if we tried to reach our potential in producing wind power, could be the 5th largest wind power producer in the world. So the issue is not that sustainable energy is hard to cultivate. It's that we need to make this upfront investment for a long-term profit. And in addition to that, so that's more of the scientific, the climate justice side of this bill. But the way that I like to describe the Green New Deal is like a 3-pronged approach to fighting climate change. So there's climate justice, like I just talked about. And then there's social justice reform and economic justice reform that comes with that. So economic justice would be raising the minimum wage to a living wage. And, $15 an hour is fantastic. But like in Wisconsin, we still use the federal minimum wage here of $7.25 an hour. In Appleton, the living wage for a single parent with one child is $30 an hour. So we have to be honest in seeing that even $15 an hour in most cases is not enough to support someone and give them the basic food, water, and shelter they need to live. Also, an economic justice is opening opportunities for education and providing free 2- and 4-year college for every American that wants it, providing healthcare for every American that needs it, and providing housing for every American that needs it. Because let's be honest, you guys know, we just lived through a pandemic where we saw, millions of people die. There are there are consequences to Americans who got laid off during this pandemic not being able to go to the hospital when they have COVID-19. And the final part of that is social justice. And, it's listening to indigenous communities on environmental issues, being that indigenous communities have protected this environment for thousands of years. For thousands of years, the indigenous community has protected the environment in the United States of America. So we need to put their voices at the front of this discussion. It means ending and defunding any institutions that are inherently racist. So defunding police departments that are murdering Black and brown people in the streets every day, and funding different forms of public safety that are more equitable. And being honest about the fact that, BIPOC communities in this country are more likely to be living in poverty, not because of anything that they've done, but just because of the history and the way that this country was founded. And we need to make sure that more people are getting a fair shot. So that's a long way of explaining the Green New Deal. Is we're fighting climate change, but also we are incorporating social and economic justice into that to make sure that our country is a more equitable place and a better place to live than it's ever been.
Interesting. I mean, I got a chance to read the Green New Deal, the resolution that AOC and Markey put out. I didn't know some of the things that you talked about. I think any change in our economy has to address the systematic issues as well, because you're right. If we don't address those issues along with it, I think it's going to be extremely hard to fully confront, climate justice, because there is going to be that opportunity of continuing to divide and conquer people. I mean, Republicans do this very well, where they say, well, we can't have this because if we do, then, your rights are going to get taken away, or your wages are going to drop X, Y, and Z, or your jobs are going to get shipped away, etc. And I think if you address that with a jobs guarantee and fair wages and education, then they don't really have that tactic to demonize something such as the Green New Deal. And obviously they still find ways to do it, but it's basically on cultural reasons because people don't like AOC. For example, I know like Marjorie Taylor Greene hates the Green New Deal, and she challenged to debate her.
Yeah.
But then we found out very quickly that she didn't actually even read the Green New Deal. She's like, "Oh wait, let me read it first, and then we can."
Andre, let's be realistic here. That's a lot of reading for someone with a third grade reading level.
Yeah, you definitely got a true point. I maybe I'm putting a little bit too much pressure on her to read 14 pages. I'm no expert in Congress, but I think 14 pages is minimum. But maybe for Marjorie Taylor Greene, we should kind of reduce it to about 3 to 4 pages, and it would be digestible.
Well, and look, here's the thing is, and you guys brought up the 14 pages. At this point, the Green New Deal is a framework. The Green New Deal, I guess it has been introduced in the form of a bill in those 14 pages. But as you guys know, if you've read it, and if people listening have read the Green New Deal before, it is a framework, and it is something that will probably evolve before it's ever passed. But the main thing about the Green New Deal is it acknowledges the issues we have in our society, and it acknowledges the intersectionality of social, economic, and climate justice. So regardless of how in depth it is, I don't think you can reason with Marjorie Taylor Greene, as you guys are suggesting. If I was AOC, I would steer away from that debate, because you know what? There's no way that you can rationalize an argument to her or the people that she would bring to view that. Those people are not going to view it rationally regardless of what you say, which is why I think it's smart for AOC to stay away from that. There's no reasoning with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
100% agree. But I do want to push back a little bit. And this is not, a tough criticism, but I think it's part of the debate that I think needs to happen. As I read the Green New Deal, there was one thing that I did not see, which I think is a huge issue. And maybe you guys, this is part of the fight. Maybe I just didn't do enough research on it. But one of the hugest polluters in the United States or of the United States is the U.S. military. And I think to effectively address climate change is to rein in the military-industrial complex, because they just waste a whole bunch when it comes to CO2. I guess my question, and well, I want you to chime into this a little bit as far as like criticism, is does the Green New Deal or some aspect of it include, ending the wars, reining in the military industrial complex? Because I don't see us effectively addressing climate change unless we address these endless wars in the military industrial complex. So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right. I don't think that is a part of this bill. I don't think it's in the bill, but I do on a personal level, and honestly speaking for the Sunrise Movement as well, like, wars are a waste of life. Wars are a waste of money. And I mean, if you look at, our wars right now in Iraq, and hopefully the war in Afghanistan is coming to an end, but it doesn't make any sense. There is no reason that we should have ever gone to Iraq or Afghanistan in the first place. And I think you're right in being concerned about that. And the other thing is, yes, when you have giant aircraft carriers and fighter jets flying all over the world, those are going to be massive emitters. And I agree. I agree with your criticism that should be addressed specifically. But I also believe that by capping government carbon emissions, which this would do, the government would have no choice but to take some sort of action related to the military, regardless of what it is. Like, I don't think it's possible to drastically reduce our government's carbon emissions without addressing military carbon emissions, because they're so large. And you're right. And I think that's a fantastic point, and I do think that should be called out, because, regardless of military spending, there's a massive environmental impact to what we're doing as well.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, the U.S. military you could point out as the single... so many of these issues are intertwined, right? Yes, the U.S. military is a massive polluter, but they are also being used as the enforcer of the capitalist hegemony, who a lot of these, massive multinational conglomerate organizations are the rest of the top 10 polluters, right? So, and, let's take it a step further into how a lot of modern society's issues fall prey to this. The student debt crisis. The military receives a ton of recruits because of what it is able to offer to young people financially that they would not be able to receive otherwise. The free college, the healthcare, a lot of the benefits that the U.S. military offer, they specifically target poor neighborhoods because these are those are the people who are most likely to need it. So, I think to give the U.S. military a pass as just like, oh well, there's such, it's just so hard to get the average American to recognize how and why so many of these issues end up at the desk of the same entities, that it's disappointing to see not only so little being done about it, but in the case of the U.S. military this year getting even more funding than they've had in the past, despite the fact that they are, I believe 3 times more funding than the Chinese military, which is the second largest on the planet. And I believe they are still slightly more funding than the 2 through 10 militaries on the planet combined. So to tackle just one of these issues, it's remarkable how many problems we could solve if we were able to hit the U.S. military on all fronts rather than even just focusing on the climate aspect, of which, like Anders said, they are one of the single worst entities on the planet.
Yeah, definitely agree there. Another point I wanted to make, this isn't a criticism of Sunrise, but a criticism of the Democratic Party. So I think the Sunrise during the primaries put a really good tactic out, and they had these candidates sign a pledge not to take fundraising from the oil industry or fossil fuel industry, which I thought was perfect, because I do think if you really want change, you have to change campaign finance, and I think that was a good first step. But then we also see that, similar to the Republican Party, that they've kind of reversed, or the Republican Party never reversed their position, but the DNC reversed their position of not taking fossil fuel money and started taking it again. And this kind of goes into the issue of why we really don't see the climate action that we would want to see. And that really has to do with the power of money in politics and the fossil fuel industry and lobbying and whatnot. So I just want to hear your perspective on how you see the influence of money in politics and the influence of the oil industry, and why it's not just a Republican issue, but kind of a both sides issue.
Yeah. So first of all, Andre, I really like what you said, because I have always been a strong believer in we need to normalize and make it okay to criticize the Democratic establishment. And I know a lot of people that are like the age of our parents, they get a little bit nervous when you go after Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi. It's like, guys, we don't want to get too divisive. But I think you're right, and we need to look at this objectively, and we need to look at this fairly. And at times, Democrats take as much, if not more, fossil fuel money than Republicans do. And I know, in my personal opinion, I don't think that the drastic change that our country needs is possible until we reverse Citizens United and have some sort of campaign finance reform. Because, like, you're absolutely right. Like, the reason that America is lagging and falling behind in the area of addressing climate change is 100% because both sides of the aisle are absolutely blinded by fossil fuel funding. And it's the same reason that, if you go into other issues like healthcare and pharmaceuticals, it's the same thing. We can't get any progressive change that we need in this country done because of campaign finance reform. And I think that, honestly, to get some of these Green New Deal goals done, we're going to need some sort of campaign finance reform. But I do want to go back to what you said about Sunrise Movement and the no fossil fuel money pledge. I think this has at least demonstrated that running as a progressive candidate in purple districts off of small donations is possible. I think a lot of people know Katie Porter in the House. She brings a little whiteboard to all her hearings when she's schooling bank executives. But Katie Porter, she is in a district that is very much purple, and she's one of the most progressive members of the House. So I think not taking fossil fuel money is not something that keeps you from getting to elected office. And I think that something that's been very helpful with the Sunrise Movement and also the work that Our Revolution does is it's proving that, like, grassroots campaigns work. You don't need to take massive amounts of money to win an election. You need to talk about issues that people are concerned about and people are in support of. And I think that's more powerful than any money in getting people elected. And I think people like AOC and Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman beating, very much entrenched members of the Democratic establishment prove that.
Well, and that leads us right back to what, Anders? The Bernie Sanders campaign of 2016,
exactly,
which showed us that small grassroots, individual small donations with a grassroots funded campaign can compete with these mega donor corporatist establishment candidates if you are pushing policies that will help enough of the proletariat. So, I mean, this is basic math, right? It's a lot easier if you go to one person, convince them that you're a great candidate, and they give you $10 million. It's a lot easier to do that than to go to 10 million people and convince them to give you $1, and then, you will have the same amount of funding, but you put a lot less work into it. And that's, I think, a problem with one of the biggest problems with current campaign finance laws is because we have allowed individual donors, the single whales, so much influence over our political system. If you're Joe Schmo candidate, establishment candidate A, what are you going to do? Are you going to go spend one day, one 30-minute phone call with some mega rich donor to convince him to give you the same amount of money that would have taken you 10 months to raise from a grassroots campaign? And I think that in and of itself kind of shows a problem with a lot of the American system, that we have it designed to cater to those individual massive donors. And that's not surprising. I mean, everything about American society caters to the ultra rich. But I think the Sanders campaign has shown us that you can fight that and you can win. You just have to be putting in the work, putting in the effort day in and day out. And I hope that's a trend that we can see continue.
Well, I think that just shows you the power of numbers, because that's why the establishment worked extremely hard to make sure that Bernie would not be the Democratic nominee. Because if you allow someone like Bernie Sanders to be the Democratic nominee, there's kind of no stopping that momentum, because people start to see like, oh, we can do this if we unite. And then, it goes from there, from campaigns to unionizing to Medicare for all. And then it just kind of never stops. And them kind of stifling Bernie Sanders and keeping him from being the presidential nominee is probably the best thing that could have happened to the establishment. But the one thing that they forgotten is that the movement has begun. And it's not going to stop simply because of Bernie Sanders is done. And I think that's what's impressive about groups like OWR, DSA, Sunrise Movement, is because they're continuing that fight and showing that, somebody doesn't have to do bundlers to be an effective candidate. You just have to be able to work your ASS off. And one thing I would like to point out is that it's funny, how like boomers are like, you young millennials just don't want to work hard. You just want things to come easy to you. But, most of the boomers in Congress, they don't want to actually knock doors or do the hard work. They just want to make phone calls all day and win the easy way. But I just think that's kind of funny.
And yeah, I mean, bringing this whole kind of tangent back to the Green New Deal here is, look, campaign finance dictates the policy of the establishment candidates. So taking fossil fuel money, you can't tell me that if you vote against the Green New Deal after you take millions of dollars from ExxonMobil, you can't tell me that that is because that's, that's goodwill, you think it's the right thing to do. You're obviously doing them a favor, and saying anything else is just, insulting the public and saying that you think they're stupid enough to believe that. And look, like, campaign finance dictating what people vote for is very different than what popular support is for. I mean, I think a lot of establishment people on both sides would have you believe that the Green New Deal is unpopular, but, Data for Progress says that 59% of the country is in favor of the Green New Deal at this point, while only about 28% is strictly opposed. So, and it's the same thing with the $15 minimum wage and everything. It's not that the policies are unpopular. It's not that people don't want them. It's that elected officials and politicians don't want them. It has nothing to do with what the actual country and what the people want.
If I'm being brutally honest, I don't know if I would say it's that the politicians don't want them. I think a lot of politicians literally do not care. They are just, their main goal is to win re-election, right? And we know that 90 to 95% of elections are won by the candidate who spends the most money. Therefore, they are going to cater their opinions to whatever makes them the most money. And right now, that is by accepting these large dollar donations from individual contributors, such as these massive oil companies that can afford to be the $10 million in one 30-minute phone call type of donors.
And I think there are two great examples of this in the 2020 primary, and I think that is one, Elizabeth Warren, who I have respect for. I think she was a good candidate. She ran on the right issues. And in the primary, she committed to no PAC money, only individual donations, but then said if she made it to the general election, she would take large dollar donations again. And her support dropped off, and she ended up dropping out of the race. And I think another example of this is Beto O'Rourke ran a vastly popular Senate campaign against Ted Cruz in 2018. And in Texas, he came within 2 points of beating Ted Cruz in a grassroots campaign on progressive issues. And he ran for president in 2020. He hired a ton of Obama and Bill Clinton advisors to advise his presidential campaign. He ran to the center. He was taking big donations from Obama's friends. And, there were all the rumors that Obama secretly wanted Beto to be the one who won the nomination. And he lost. He came in like 12th place.
Yeah, he got whooped. It's not
he
even
got
that
absolutely he got absolutely whooped because you know what? When he didn't run on progressive policy anymore, all those progressive voters realized, oh, so you were lying to us the whole time in 2018. We're just going to go vote for Bernie because he's actually supporting the policy that we want.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are hitting the nail on the head right there. I mean, money rules, and it's even more apparent during the presidential election. And I think if it wasn't for Joe Biden, Bernie would have won. And I think the reason why Biden won is simply because he had that name recognition, and they kind of all backed him at the end of the cycle there.
Well,
but
I would say it's because of Barack Obama.
Yeah, he kind of made them backroom deals, backroom calls and whatnot. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because going back to the money in politics issue, we're seeing Joe Biden completely moonwalk away from all the policy that he said he would support. He said he would support canceling student debt. He's abandoning that. He said he would support a public option. He's abandoning that, obviously, because he takes money from the healthcare industry. He said he's going to do all of these things that he isn't going to do. And I think it really has to do with the situation of campaign finance. So simply because of that, we'll see if he actually takes any actual action when it comes to climate justice. And who knows if I might be wrong on this, but is he even getting back into the Paris Climate Accord?
Yes, he is, but
okay.
Nobody is quite sure yet what the goals are going to be, because getting into Paris Climate Accord is one thing, but then you set your own carbon goals once you join. So what level they set that at and when they reach carbon neutrality is just as important, because he's stated that 2050 is his date for carbon neutrality, but scientists have been very clear that this is far too late and there will still be irreparable damage done to our planet. So part of, what Sunrise is doing is like, okay, the Democratic establishment position is now 2050. We need to make it clear that, like, that's way too late. We need big action now so we can maybe reach carbon neutrality by 2030 or 2035. And of course that's a big ask. Of course this is a quick turnaround. Well, that's why we need to take this bold action right now. Because if we do this gradually, like, it's too late. Cities will go underwater forever. We'll create like permanent deserts and have wildfires all over the country. And I think part of this Biden thing I want to bring it back to like why it's important to talk at like local and state levels about climate issues. And, I'm new to Wisconsin, but I do know how gerrymandered the state legislature is here and how it's basically, a Republican stronghold at this point. But look, here's the main thing that I wanted to share, being that, you know, people who listen to this are going to be from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a prime example of a place that would vastly benefit from a Green New Deal, where the minimum wage is low, where we have the mixture of mass agriculture, which is bad for the earth and taking family farmers out of business. And we have that balance going on in Wisconsin with the people who actually are doing farming the right way and family farmers. We have that balance, and family farmers here are struggling, and we need to support those people, and a Green New Deal would do that. Public transportation, especially in the Fox Valley area, is extremely weak. Transportation is one of the biggest carbon emitters and, you know, carbon emitting sectors. We need to improve Wisconsin public transportation. And, you know, Wisconsin, northeastern Wisconsin specifically, is one of the places where the labor movement originated. And, you know, when we transition to green jobs, we need to make sure that these green workers have the right to unionize. And Wisconsin is passionate about its unions. And that's why I think that Wisconsin is a great place for a Green New Deal. And finally, like, some of this modern environmentalist movement, like Senator Gaylord Nelson was one of the first modern environmentalists, and he's from Wisconsin. I mean, being from Minnesota, I love to crap on Wisconsin all the time. Like, the Vikings are far better than the Packers, and Minnesota's beautiful. But, like, I can acknowledge, like, Wisconsin has fantastic, like, natural landscapes and nature, and that is why, like, Wisconsin is
and
such a place.
And we actually have lakes. We have a lot more lakes than you.
Okay, it depends on how you measure a lake, but I won't get into that right now.
We also have 4 Lombardi trophies, which is, again, named after our coach. Continue, please.
But, yeah, fair enough. But the point that I'm getting at is, you know, the fact that modern environmentalism is originated in Wisconsin is not a coincidence either. And people in Wisconsin have, like, a big passion for these grassroots issues. And I think that Wisconsin is a great case study of how a place could so vastly benefit from a Green New Deal.
Yeah, I really think you're right about that, but you might have discredited everything you just said because you're shilling from Minnesota. So,
Minnesota is
hope
beautiful.
People are willing to listen.
That,
yeah.
But the Vikings are 0-4 in Super Bowls, so I just want to make sure that we reiterate that point a few more times.
Yeah, I hope people are still willing to listen to me, even though I said that.
We'll see. We'll find out. But yeah, I think it's exciting. I think I said this in our youth town hall. I am really optimistic about the future. Again, not because I know what's going to happen, but I think, you know, the youth like you and what we're fighting for is very different, and we're going to fight for actual substantive change. And I know, you know, if we continue to fight, you know, unabashedly for progressive issues, there's nothing that can stop us. Yeah, but that's pretty much all the questions and what I had to talk about. Is there anything you wanted to leave us with on how people can get involved, where they can find you, anything like that?
Of course, I would love to do some plugs. I you know, love to get people involved in the Sunrise movement, and just what I want to leave off with is, you know, these Green New Deal and progressive policies are vastly popular. It's just about advocating them and getting our elected officials to listen. And I think Wisconsin is in that place where we are ready to take a stand for these issues, especially young people in Wisconsin. And that's why I'm so excited to be here. So if you're interested in keeping in touch with what the Sunrise Movement is doing, you can find us on Instagram at Sunrise Appleton. On Instagram, you can look us up on Facebook as Sunrise Appleton as well. And also, on a more personal note, I just started my own political Twitter feed. So if any of you are interested of hearing more of what I have to say, you can follow me on Twitter at Anders_Hanhan, which is ANDERS_HANHAN. That's all I got to say. And thank you guys for having me. Again, this is an amazing idea. I love that y'all are doing this, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. We're glad to have you on. You know, it's people like you that give me hope for the future. So, I think, you know, we'll continue to work together in the near future. And yeah, I mean, do you have anything else to say, Will?
I think we covered most of it. I mean, we'll be here for another hour and a half now that I got all riled up about this Vikings-Packers thing. So I'll probably have to just call it a day now and go watch some old film to calm me down or something.
All right, everybody, tune in to the Our Wisconsin Revolution Sports Podcast up next.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
So we always say the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said, when the last one